A service dog suddenly blocked a woman with a baby at a crowded train station. Commuters were confused until the baby didn't move. Security leaned in for a closer look. What they discovered next silenced the entire platform. Here's the full story. But before we start, drop your favorite dog's name in the comments and make sure you're subscribed, because what happens next, you won't want to miss. The morning rush at Grand Central Terminal was, as usual, a carefully orchestrated chaos. Suits and sneakers blurred in motion, coffee cups in hand, eyes on screens, ears tuned to the garbled announcements echoing through the vaulted halls. Beneath the grandeur of marble columns and glimmering chandeliers, New York's rhythm pulsed forward, uninterrupted. That is, until it wasn't. On track 29 minutes before the 7:32 to Albany was due to depart, a sudden disruption unfolded quietly but firmly, almost unnoticeably at first. A large yellow Labrador, harnessed and vest-clad, normally calm and composed in her role as a trained mobility service animal, had come to a full stop in front of a woman, walking briskly with an infant tucked in a fleece blanket against her chest. The dog, Sunny, was known by station staff and commuters alike. She belonged to Daniel Hart, a visually impaired military veteran who commuted to the state capital twice weekly. Sunny never broke formation, never deviated. She was, as people said, more precise than a Rolex. But today, Sunny did the unthinkable. She refused to move. Daniel tugged gently on her harness. The woman with the baby, seemingly in her early 30s, blonde hair slightly tousled, offered a tight smile and a polite "excuse me." But Sunny stood her ground, shifting her large body directly into the woman's path, blocking her step with surgical precision. She let out a low whine, not quite a bark, not aggressive but clear, purposeful. The woman hesitated, adjusted the sleeping baby slightly, and tried stepping around. Sunny mirrored her move, again and again. Now the commuters behind them began to pile up, their momentum interrupted. A few sighed in irritation, stepping aside to pass. A transit security officer glanced over but saw nothing alarming, just a service dog acting oddly, perhaps reacting to noise or confused. It was, after all, a train station. Daniel, unaware of the situation beyond what he could hear and sense through the harness, crouched slightly to speak low into Sunny's ear. She didn't respond to his voice. Her body was locked, her gaze trained on the woman's chest, more precisely on the swaddled bundle held close. Stillness gathered. In a place like Grand Central, stillness meant attention, and attention inevitably brought scrutiny. A moment later, Sunny let out one sharp, brief bark. That was when station staff truly turned. The woman stiffened, visibly startled. She adjusted the baby again, tighter this time, her lips pressed in a thin line. She didn't scold the dog. She didn't move away either. Sunny took a step forward and placed her paw gently, deliberately on the hem of the woman's coat. It was as though she was saying, "Stop right here. This isn't over." Security was called, not urgently, just as a precaution. Two officers arrived, one taking in Daniel, who stood holding the harness now slack in his grip, and one focusing on the woman and the baby. The first officer spoke to Daniel, trying to understand the situation. Daniel, confused, explained that Sunny had halted without command, which she never did. She had even barked, something she hadn't done in 3 years of service. By now, a few commuters had pulled out their phones, filming discreetly. Others had drifted away, sensing a delay. But the atmosphere had shifted. Gone was the mindless flow of morning travel. In its place was an unspoken alertness, a collective sense that something wasn't quite right. The baby remained still, so still. The woman, perhaps sensing growing attention, clutched the infant and insisted she needed to catch her train. She was late. She had to go. Her voice was quiet, measured, but too rehearsed. Her eyes never quite settled on anyone. Sunny didn't move, Another officer arrived. A paramedic happened to be on site and was called over, standard procedure when an infant was involved in a public disturbance. The woman's demeanor tensed. And then something unexpected happened. One of the security officers, aiming to de-escalate, gently asked if she would allow a quick visual check on the baby. The woman hesitated, only for a fraction of a second, but enough. The blanket covering the baby shifted slightly in her hands, just enough for the paramedic to see what Sonny had already sensed. There was no movement, no tiny twitch, no shifting of limbs or the flutter of breath, not even the relaxed posture of a peacefully sleeping child. What lay in her arms was wrong. The paramedic acted immediately, moving in with calm authority. The woman didn't resist, not in the way one might expect. She let them take the bundle, but her eyes told a different story, blank, absent, like she had stepped outside of herself. And inside the blanket, they found not a baby sleeping, but one heavily sedated, breathing shallow, pulse faint. A bottle of children's allergy medication was found in her handbag, an unprescribed dosage. Sonny stepped back then, her mission complete. Her eyes never left the baby as the paramedics began treatment, oxygen mask over a face too pale for comfort. The woman was escorted quietly to the side, where officers began piecing together what had just unfolded. There were no raised voices, no dramatic arrests, just the quiet, clinical process of an unraveling story. Hours later, Daniel sat with Sonny in a quiet part of the station, waiting to give his statement. News had already begun to spread, first among transit staff, then trickling into local media. He didn't know what Sonny had sensed, couldn't say why she had stopped, but something had cut through her training. Her instinct, forged by years of companionship and vigilance, had overridden everything else. Later, security footage would show the woman entering the station alone, appearing calm, composed. There was no stroller, no diaper bag. The baby had not reacted to noise or movement from the moment she arrived. The woman's ID was a temporary license, issued a week ago, under a name that didn't match any birth record for a child. She had traveled from Newark that morning. Authorities traced her path back to a rental apartment in Queens. Inside, they found forged documents, maternity items with no receipts, and a journal with fragmented entries, obsessive notes about a child named Lila. No one by that name was currently missing. The real identity of the infant was still unknown. That night, in a shelter in northern Manhattan, a woman collapsed into the arms of police officers. Her 1-year-old daughter had been taken from her stroller outside a corner store 48 hours earlier. No witnesses, no leads, no hope. The news of a baby found in Grand Central reached her through a flurry of coordinated calls. The pieces began to align. DNA confirmed what Sonny had already known. Sonny became a local hero, not because she saved the day with dramatic flair, but because she stopped. She refused. She did what even seasoned officers hadn't noticed. She sensed a disconnect, a danger not of weapons or drugs, but of intention. There was no medal, no TV interview, just Daniel placing a quiet hand on her head as she lay beside him that night, her breathing slow, her ears twitching as if still tuned to danger. He whispered, "Good girl," though she needed no affirmation. Her job had never been about praise, it was about presence, about sensing what her human eyes could not see. By the time morning faded into a bruised winter afternoon, Grand Central Terminal had returned to its usual pulse. The 732 to Albany had departed, albeit without its most unusual passenger. Commuters no longer lingered at track 29, where something had felt off earlier, even if they couldn't quite explain why. The news story had started to circulate by then, though not yet viral. Service dog blocks woman with baby, rescue uncovers startling truth. At the station's administrative office, Officer Elena Bray sorted through her case notes. She'd been the one who handed the infant over to EMTs, the one who first noticed that the woman had no actual baby supplies, just a few decoys, carefully packed to look authentic. It was strange what the brain prioritized in high-stress moments. For her, it had been the silence, the baby's unnatural stillness. And Sonny, that Labrador, had not just barked, she had known. The child, later identified as Maya Lynette, had been sedated with diphenhydramine strong enough to risk respiratory suppression in infants. She was now recovering at Mount Sinai. Doctors were cautiously optimistic. The child was stabilized, awake, breathing on her own. The woman who had carried her, Elaine Carter, had been taken into quiet custody. But that wasn't the whole story. That was just the obvious thread. Detective Mariana Cruz stood in front of a whiteboard at NYPD's Missing Persons Division. She had already circled Maya's name and birth date in red. Her case had been marked inactive just the day before, filed under possible custodial abduction, unknown suspect. The child's mother, Imani Lynette, had made multiple visits to the precinct, desperately chasing answers. There had been no forced entry, no evidence of a break-in. The stroller had been found abandoned, folded, against a building's alley wall. But now, with Maya found, questions had multiplied. How did Elaine know where Maya was? What was her connection, if any, to Imani? The investigation into Elaine Carter's past revealed a threadbare identity. She had lived under multiple aliases across 3 states in the last 2 years. None had consistent employment history, no tax records. Her social security number was real, but not hers. It had belonged to a woman who died 6 years ago in Michigan. Yet all of Elaine's apartments were spotless, cleaned out. No digital footprint, no known relatives, except one, a retired nurse named Joyce Carter, her adoptive mother, now living in assisted care upstate. Detectives paid her a visit. The woman, frail but lucid, offered only one crucial detail. Elaine had never fully recovered from the loss of her child, a stillbirth, 6 years ago. The baby's name had been Lily. She held her once, Joyce recalled. Wouldn't speak for days after. Then she started seeing Lily and other babies. At grocery stores. At the park. She thought the hospital made a mistake, that they gave her child away. No formal psychiatric treatment had ever followed. No family intervention. Elaine had simply disappeared, drifting from place to place, changing names, obsessed with finding the child she believed had been taken. The tragedy deepened. But again, it wasn't the whole story. Sonny, the Labrador who had disrupted everything with a single defiant bark, lay curled in a warm patch of sunlight in Daniel's small apartment in East Harlem. She had slept for hours after the incident, exhausted not just from the event itself, but from the emotional undercurrent only she had detected. Daniel brewed tea in the kitchen, letting his fingers run along the edge of Sonny's harness still hanging on the hook. He didn't need to see it. He could feel the strain in its worn edges. The last few weeks, Sonny had acted differently. More alert, quieter, especially around children. There had been no direct clues, no disobedience, but a shift, a different kind of awareness. Now it made sense. Somehow, Sonny had sensed that Maya wasn't safe, not from violence, but from the lie wrapped around her presence. He sat beside her, scratching gently behind her ears. "You knew," he whispered. The words unnecessary but comforting. The case grew deeper 2 days later when Detective Cruz received an envelope, hand-delivered by a courier service, no return address. Inside was a single photograph, grainy, scanned. It showed Elaine Carter roughly 2 years ago, standing in what appeared to be a park, in her arms another baby. Definitely not Maya. The back of the photo had one handwritten word, Olive. A missing persons report filed in Portland, Oregon nearly 18 months ago included that exact photo. Baby Olive, a 6-month-old abducted from a foster care transition home, had never been found. The report had gone cold. No suspects, no trail, and now the same woman who took Maya had held another child, in another state. The connecting dots began forming a chilling map, not a random act, not a singular delusion, but a pattern, a mission. Forensic teams scoured Elaine's latest apartment, using luminol to detect trace evidence. A locked cabinet revealed dozens of laminated documents, printed news articles, obituaries of stillborn infants, hospital records of mothers with disputed birth outcomes. In many, children were listed as deceased, but no death certificates were ever issued. What they found next turned the case completely. A wall of photographs, hand-labeled. Each picture featured a baby cradled in the arms of a woman who appeared to be Elaine, sometimes disguised, sometimes in the background. Always with the same expression, calm, content, maternal. There were 9 photographs, but only one baby had been recovered. Where were the others? Back in the hospital, Maya had stabilized enough for brief visits. Amani was permitted to hold her, closely monitored by staff and trauma counselors. The reunion was tearful, but the infant's flat gaze, a result of heavy sedation, would haunt Amani for days. She whispered to her daughter, sang the song she had always sung at bedtime, stroked the soft curls above her brow. And then, as she shifted slightly in her chair, Maya's fingers twitched, a subtle grasp. Then another. It was a beginning. Outside the glass, Officer Bray and Detective Cruz watched silently. No one spoke. The damage might not be visible yet, but it would surface. It always did. And yet, so would healing. What puzzled Cruz most wasn't Elaine's mental break. It was how she had remained undetected. Across jurisdictions, across time, she wasn't reckless. She was careful, calculated, and she wasn't working alone. Fingerprints from Elaine's apartment finally confirmed it. A partial match. A name the system had flagged once before. Hannah Ridge, a registered nurse who had been dismissed from her position for improperly accessing patient records. Her last known address was in Newark. Her car was found 2 blocks from where Maya had gone missing. Another thread, tightly wound, was beginning to loosen. And yet, for Daniel and Sonny, the world outside the investigation kept moving. He found himself being stopped in the street. A deli owner refused his payment one morning. Someone sent a new harness with a gold-stitched patch. Hero. But none of that compared to what happened when he and Sonny visited the hospital just briefly, just once. Maya had been released from the ICU, still groggy but showing better coordination. And when Sonny entered the room, slowly, gently, she walked straight to the toddler's crib and lay beside it. No movement, no noise, just presence. And Maya, without guidance, without words, reached out her small fingers and touched Sonny's head. A connection passed between them, one forged not by speech but by something deeper. Intuitive, elemental. That moment, unscripted, unrehearsed, would be remembered far longer than the headlines. More questions would emerge in the coming days. Where were the other babies in Elaine's photos? Who else had helped her? How many lives had been altered under the surface of quiet, unnoticed crimes? But the one thing that was clear, even to those hardened by years in law enforcement, was this: if Sonny hadn't blocked her path that day, Maya would be gone. Not dead, but displaced, raised under a lie. Her identity unraveled, her mother forever searching. Sonny didn't detect crime in the traditional sense. She didn't sniff out explosives. She wasn't trained to tackle suspects or chase threats. She simply saw what others didn't: an off-rhythm in the bond between a woman and child, a disconnect between biology and behavior, the wrong kind of stillness in what should have been life. The investigation was far from over, but something had already been restored. And it started with a single stubborn refusal from a dog who wouldn't move. 6 weeks later, the remnants of winter still clung stubbornly to the edges of the city, curling around rooftops and under overpasses. But inside the missing persons division, things were heating up. Detective Mariana Cruz sat across from a corkboard littered with connections, names, states, dates, and one consistent figure that appeared like a ghost in the background of every event. Elaine Carter. Or whatever name she was using at the time. She hadn't just abducted Maya Lynette. She'd been involved directly or indirectly in at least 4 other disappearances, each one subtle, each one delayed, each involving infants recently placed in foster care, emergency shelters, or disputed custody. And in every case, Elaine's trail ended cold, until Sonny stopped her. Across the city, Daniel Hart sat with Sonny on the grass of Riverside Park. Spring was teasing its return. The trees had begun to bud, the river breeze no longer stinging. Sonny watched children chase pigeons near the walking path, her amber eyes soft but alert. Daniel had come to recognize the subtle shifts in her posture. He wasn't surprised when she tensed at the sight of a particular woman walking with a stroller. But after a few moments, Sonny relaxed again. Just noise, not danger. Since the incident at the train station, Sonny had become more than a service dog. She was now something of a quiet celebrity. But neither she nor Daniel wanted fame. They wanted clarity, purpose, stability. And yet Sonny wasn't at peace. Daniel had noticed it. At night she would pace briefly before settling. At daycare visits to children's hospitals, she clung to certain rooms. Fixated on certain cries, she was still searching, still sensing. The breakthrough in the case came not from fingerprint matches or surveillance footage, but from a flight log. A small private plane chartered from upstate New York to Omaha, Nebraska, had a peculiar passenger manifest. Elaine's name didn't appear, but Hannah Ridge, the disgraced nurse identified by partial prints, had boarded with her daughter 3 weeks before Maya was taken. The timing matched the disappearance of another child. Juliana Reyes reported missing from a transitional care facility in New Jersey, and from that detail came another unraveling. A second photograph, this one from a gas station camera, showed Hannah and Elaine traveling together. The timestamp placed them less than a mile from the location where Juliana was last seen. They had worked together, not for money, not for trafficking, but for belief. Elaine wasn't just recreating a lost maternal connection. She was orchestrating a version of reality where broken women could rebuild their lost families using other people's children. To her, it wasn't a crime. It was restoration. Back at headquarters, Cruz and Officer Elena Bray traced calls, digital payments, and the hidden web of rental storage units tied to various aliases. Inside one, they discovered photographs, clothing, baby books, all curated, all labeled. They weren't trophies. They were proof of presence, evidence of motherhood, fictional, but deeply felt. In the corner of one locker, a crate contained unopened gifts, a white onesie with Lily's first birthday embroidered on the chest, and a hand-bound journal titled, "The Children Who Found Me." Elaine had never stopped mourning, but she had also never stopped rewriting the ending, and that grief had become an engine, not a wound. In Nebraska, local authorities followed up on a lead from Cruz's team. They located a small farmhouse rented under yet another alias. Inside was a crib, a car seat, food, clean clothes, and a baby, healthy, giggling, unaware that she was at the center of a nationwide search. Juliana Reyes had been found. The woman with her, calling herself Tina, appeared gentle and attentive. She had forged documents, immunization records, a backstory built on lies, but there was no abuse, no visible harm, just delusion. When asked how she came to have Juliana, she repeated one name over and over, Elaine. She said, "I was ready to be a mother again." News of the recovery traveled quickly. The media framed it as a complex rescue operation, The public debated how so many women could be fooled into believing strangers' babies were their own. But Cruz saw something darker. Elaine had built a network, not for profit, not for exploitation, but for validation. Each woman she recruited had lost a child or custody under painful or contested circumstances. Each was susceptible, emotionally frayed, isolated, searching for meaning, and Elaine gave them that meaning, a second chance, a new child, a new name. She had built a family not through biology but through shared grief. Sunny's instincts hadn't stopped. Even after Maya was returned, she remained alert. At a school visit arranged by the city's K-9 outreach program, she sat rigid outside one classroom window, ears pinned forward, tail still. Daniel approached confused. Inside the classroom, a substitute teacher held a toddler in her lap, unusual in itself. Later, a routine check revealed the woman wasn't in the school's official staffing registry. She had arrived that morning with forged credentials. Her ID badge had been copied from a long-retired employee, and the toddler wasn't hers. She'd come to watch him, hold him. She hadn't taken him yet, but she would have. And once again, Sunny had stopped something before it began. Cruz assembled the final reports with a kind of reverence. The case had unearthed at least 5 children recovered from situations they wouldn't have survived long term. But it wasn't just about the children, it was about a dog who didn't rely on words or laws. Sunny's strength wasn't her training, it was her heart, her ability to sense the smallest fractures in what should have been seamless connections. She knew when a mother wasn't really a mother. She knew when love was hollow. On a warm May afternoon, Daniel took Sunny to a small ceremony hosted at City Hall. They were given a plaque, a quiet acknowledgement. Sunny didn't care for crowds, but she tolerated them. Later that day, they visited the Lynette home. Omani opened the door, Maya clinging to her hip, fingers gripping tight around her mother's shirt. When she saw Sunny, Maya's grip loosened. She leaned forward, no fear this time, only recognition. She reached out, open-palmed. Sunny walked forward and pressed her head gently into Maya's tiny chest, resting there, as if to say, "You're safe now. I know." No barks, no alarms, just the silent reassurance of a bond sealed not through training but truth. Elaine Carter remained under psychiatric observation. She didn't resist treatment. She rarely spoke, but in her room she kept a drawing she'd made during an art therapy session. It showed a dog, golden, still, eyes fixed on something unseen. When the therapist asked about it, Elaine only said, "She sees too much," and smiled. Months later, Daniel and Sunny visited a shelter for children awaiting foster placement. It was routine now. The children played and Sunny watched, never intruding, only observing, and occasionally she would stand and walk toward one child, lay down beside them, press close, and Daniel would know that was the one who needed watching, the one no one else noticed, the one she felt might slip away unless someone stopped and paid attention. Not every hero wears a badge, not every warning comes in words. Sometimes all it takes is a bark, or the refusal to move, or a single, still stare that says, "Something's not right. Look again." Sunny had done that. And for 5 children and maybe more, that had been everything. That's it for today. Hit that like button and show some love to our hero, Sunny. We've got more real stories where instincts save lives, and trust me, the next one will leave you speechless. So don't just watch, subscribe, because the next twist could be even closer than you think.